On August 4th, we got UFC 227, headlined by probably the biggest rematch in the sport in recent memory. The rest of the card, though, unfortunately, I gotta say it's pretty lackluster. And I'm not even just talking about the prelims. I mean, even on the main card, the first two fights, Santos versus Holland, I'll get into why that's bad in a minute. And Viana versus Aldrich, I mean, it's a good fight. Like, it's a good matchup between two strawweights, and I'm gonna have fun breaking it down. But they're just really not pay-per-view worthy. And I'm not going to rag on this too much, so without any further ado, let's get right into these predictions. For the first fight on the main card, we have number 13 ranked middleweight, Thiago Santos, who's coming off of a knockout loss to David Branch, but other than that, in his past couple fights, he's looked like an absolute murderer, versus Kevin Holland, who 2 weeks ago won his fight on the Contender Series, and he didn't get the contract, but here he is on the main card of a pay-per-view. Let me get into a problem I have with this matchup. Now, I understand it's short notice, and Dana had to reach out to whoever he could find to have a replacement fight for the Gus versus Volkan fight that fell off the card. But Kevin Holland was on the Contender Series facing an opponent who was looked like he was like 4'11", and I'm not discrediting that guy, but Kevin had not a good performance at all. He was getting tagged, he got hurt in the fight, and he had like an 11-inch reach advantage, and I was like, dude, you're good, you're a good fighter, but you're not ready for the UFC. And Dana and Sean obviously thought the same thing because they didn't give him a contract, and I was like, okay man, good for you, you got on the show, hopefully we'll get to see you next year. And that's how you build prospects. But then I saw that he was on the main card of 227, so he goes from not getting a contract at all to being on the main card of a pay-per-view versus an absolute killer like Thiago Santos. And I was like, what? Dana, how does that make any sense at all? This is a guy that you want to build up as a prospect, and when he gets older and more experienced, you try to get him in the UFC on the Fight Pass prelims, not this. So that's enough ranting about that situation, but I have no idea what they were thinking with this one. But with the actual matchup, in my opinion, it doesn't really look good for Kevin Holland. He's a creative striker. He has victories by spinning back elbow and things like that. He's like a Muay Thai style. But in his Contender Series fight, he was fighting an obvious tomato can so he could try to get a highlight reel knockout, and he couldn't do it. I just didn't really see a lot of killer instinct or knockout power, even though he does have a lot of knockouts on his record. He hasn't fought anyone who's even close to as good as Thiago Santos, so Thiago's going to have the obvious advantage with the quality of opponents he's fought. His last victory was a knockout body kick over Anthony Smith, who just demolished Shogun, so I mean that should tell you something right there. So I have to give Thiago Santos the advantage in power, speed, skill, pretty much everything here. And the fact that it's short notice, and Thiago, it's not as short notice for him because he was preparing for a fight. If you remember, Thiago weighed in case either Israel Adesanya or Brad Tavares didn't make weight. He was ready to step in and fight then, so he's been ready to fight for a while. And I know Kevin just had a fight 2 weeks ago, but the guy he was fighting, Thiago would have probably actually sent that guy to the morgue. So definitely two different levels here. There's levels to this. And since it's short notice, this is Kevin's UFC debut against an absolute killer who has more knockout power, is faster and like bigger mass-wise. I got to think Thiago gets this done by knockout, probably in the first round. I think if Thiago connects a big punch or even a big kick, because Thiago's been known to do like spinning wheel kicks, it's just going to be over the first time something big lands. So Kevin Holland, I'm sorry that Dana is putting you through the ringer like this, but I got to say, my personal prediction is Thiago Santos by first round knockout. Next up, we have Polyana Viana versus JJ Aldrich, a women's strawweight bout. Polyana is starting to get a little bit of hype behind her. She's finished every single one of her wins and only has one loss. In her UFC debut, she finished Maya Stevenson in the first round, which was an impressive performance, but Maya Stevenson has never won a fight against an opponent who's actually won a pro bout. So in my opinion, Maya Stevenson being in the UFC would probably make her the worst UFC fighter on the roster. And I mean, absolutely no disrespect, but when we're looking at the matchup here, and that's Polyana's only victory in the UFC, while JJ Aldrich has beaten power strikers like Danielle Taylor, which you don't really see at women's strawweight, and her victory over Chan Mi-Jian, I just think that JJ has had more quality opponents. Usually the Brazilian fighters will have padded records a little bit, and if you just look at Polyana's record, she's fought a lot of people that like aren't even listed on Tapology, for example, and have bad records. So her record is good, but is it padded? Yeah, it might be. JJ has definitely fought better competition, so you got to keep that in mind. And usually these fighters like Polyana who finish 100% of their wins and have never gone to decision, usually if you can take them to decision, you win. So I think a veteran, and yeah, I'm going to call JJ a veteran just because she's been fighting forever. If a veteran like JJ takes you into deep waters, it's usually not going to be good for you if you've never been there before. So in this fight, I think Polyana's the big favorite, and I don't necessarily disagree with that because she looked really good in her UFC debut, and she's known for being really good on the ground, and her stats look amazing at this point. But that's another thing. Her stats on the UFC website are like great at this point, but that's only because she's had one fight in the UFC. That's based off of one fight against an opponent who isn't even UFC tier. I hate to say that, but she's really not. So with this fight, I think if JJ, who's on a 2-fight win streak, comes in like her last 2 fights where she completely neutralized her opponents, Danielle Taylor, I'm sure, was the big favorite too and had even knocked girls out at strawweight, which is crazy. JJ completely neutralized her game. She had the longer reach. She was able to keep her on the outside with the jab and stuff all the takedown attempts, and she did the same thing to Chan Mi-Jian. So I think she can do the same thing to Polyana. The only thing I think could result in Polyana winning is if she gets the fight to the ground, because JJ doesn't have the best takedown defense, and she might be able to get a submission then. But in this one, I got to take the veteran JJ. I think she gets it done by decision, and I'm picking her for the upset. Next up, we have Cub Swanson versus Renato Moicano. Both of these guys making fairly quick, relatively quick turnarounds. This is definitely a crossroads fight. Cub is on the decline in his career. He's on a 2-fight losing streak, and he's expressed interest in moving to other promotions like PFL, while Renato is on the way up, and some people are even saying he could be a future champ. He's looked close to flawless in the octagon. You know, he only has 1 loss, and it was to Brian Ortega. Fighters like Brian and Renato are the new age of featherweight, and Cub is definitely from the old days. He was fighting back in WEC. So for Cub fans, I think this really could be a sad thing, and I think you guys want to keep your eyes peeled because this might really be the last time you see Cub Swanson in the octagon. And I'm not like completely counting him out, but I do think it's very unlikely that Cub wins this fight. I think he might be the next guy that leaves the UFC while he was in the top 10. Just for a guy like him that's so gritty and tough and loves fighting, I don't know if 3 back-to-back losses is going to make him want to stay in the UFC when he feels like he could be getting better pay, better opportunities elsewhere. So Cub has always kind of been known as that guy who's like a gritty slugger, brawler, who will just get in there and throw punches and make the fight interesting. Like in his fight with Doo Ho Choi, it was pretty much they were just going punch for punch, and that's why it won Fight of the Year. People like watching that. But against a guy like Renato, who actually lands more per minute, and I would say is more accurate and has the reach advantage and absorbs less damage than Cub, I don't think Cub's going to have the striking advantage. I don't even necessarily know if Cub has the power advantage in this fight because Cub hasn't knocked anyone out since 2013. So, and I mean, Renato's been in there with guys like Jeremy Stevens who still have crushing, brutal knockout power. I just don't know if Cub is even going to be able to contend with Renato in the striking. In Renato's last fight against Calvin Kattar, Calvin was coming off of a huge knockout over Shane Burgos, and Renato just completely shut him down with leg kicks and jabs, and by the end of the fight, Renato was piecing up Calvin. So I don't think Cub's going to have the advantage in striking here, even though I feel like that's Cub's strong point. I don't think it's going to be an advantage in this fight. And Cub sometimes will like lean back on his wrestling and get takedowns and stuff, but I feel like Renato's jiu-jitsu game is going to completely neutralize Cub's wrestling. I don't think Cub's going to want to take a shot in this fight at all. I think if he does, he's going to end up getting submitted. So I'd give Renato the advantage in every situation on striking and on the ground, and I think he's going to be able to land more punches than Cub, and I think he probably has a better gas tank too. If Jeremy Stevens or Calvin Kattar couldn't knock out Renato or hurt him on the feet, I really don't see Cub doing it, especially at this stage in his career. So although Cub is a fan favorite and everybody seems to love him, I think the younger, newer, fresher face is going to get the victory here. So I have Renato Moicano by decision. Next up for the co-main event and first title fight of the card, we have the most dominant champion in UFC history, Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, versus a version of Henry Cejudo who's probably going to be his toughest challenge yet. Demetrious is the huge favorite, but everyone was expecting that. He's pretty much completely dominated everyone he's fought so far, including Henry the first time. Demetrious hit him with a knee to the body that hurt him really bad, and then he was able to get the TKO in the first round. But I think Henry's grown a lot since then. He's had a lot of good victories, and his last loss to Joe Benavidez, I don't really think he lost that fight. So in my opinion, the only person that Henry's really lost to at flyweight was Demetrious that first time. And like I said, Henry's evolved a whole lot since then. Henry looked great in his fight against Wilson Hayes. He got the knockout. And I think Henry, his wrestling was always on point. The dude's an Olympic gold medalist. But now I think his striking is starting to come together. He's got that Machida karate style. Just get in, get out, throw a bunch of punches, land big shots. So I think Henry's striking has evolved a lot. Demetrious hasn't really evolved at all, but he hasn't really needed to. He's always been extremely dominant and well-rounded and good at every aspect of his game. So this is definitely a tough one because I don't want to completely dismiss Henry Cejudo, especially since he's obviously gotten better, but at the same time, it's kind of stupid to pick against Demetrious Johnson at this point. I'm going to be pulling for Henry because I'd love to see a big upset here and a new champion just to refresh the division. But based on Henry's last performance against Sergio Pettis, where he basically just, it was more of a lay and pray fight. I had big expectations from the Wilson Hayes fight, obviously because he won by knockout. But against Sergio Pettis, it was more that lay and pray wrestling, and that will not work against Demetrious Johnson at all. Demetrious is too good at scrambling on the ground to get caught and laid on in those situations. And I mean, as we saw last time, I know Henry's gotten better, but Demetrious won in the striking. So I got to say it'll be pretty even in terms of the striking. Demetrious has the longer reach, and he's gone against guys like John Dodson, who are known as heavy hitters, and beaten them. So I don't think Henry Cejudo is going to get a knockout here. And I don't really think Henry's going to be able to, he might be able to out-wrestle Demetrious, but on the ground and in the scramble and maybe in submissions, I don't think he's going to be able to get Demetrious on that. So I know it might be kind of boring that I'm picking Demetrious, who's going to be like the minus 500 favorite or whatever, but I got to say, I think Demetrious gets it done. I'm not going to pick a method, and I hope this isn't a boring 5-rounder that just continues to ruin the flyweight division, and I hope Henry wins, but I am picking Demetrious Johnson to win this fight. And finally, for the main event, the 135-pound belt is on the line. We have a rematch between TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt. Their fight last year really could have gone either way. We saw Cody drop TJ at the end of the first round, and if there would have been about 10 more seconds, maybe 5 more seconds, Cody could have easily finished that. TJ was saved by the bell, but I'm not discrediting him at all. He came in the fight with an amazing game plan, had really unorthodox movement and striking. Cody was just kind of looking to box and had a more traditional stance, while TJ was throwing leg kicks, head kicks, and switching up stances every few minutes or seconds. And Cody got caught with a head kick and dropped, and then eventually caught with that right hook and finished. But to be honest, the fight really could have gone either way. I think that's what's so interesting about it. The first time around, I think Cody was too emotionally invested in all the beef. And I think TJ did a much better job of separating that from the actual fight. After TJ got dropped, he stayed composed, regained his consciousness, and he was able to come back out there and get the win. While on the other hand, in my opinion, Cody was fighting way too emotional. He wasn't really setting anything up. He was just looking for the finish. And after he dropped TJ, he smelt blood, and he just didn't fight smart after that. And he eventually got caught. So... And also, I don't know if this is true or not, but Cody said that he wasn't able to train for a couple weeks before that fight because of his back injury. And that's why he was saying, oh, I got off the couch and dropped you. So if that's true, I'm sure it did have something to do with the outcome of the fight. I'm not going to focus too much on that, though, because it might just be a rumor. But anyway, so I think TJ last time around was a lot smarter and had better technique and a better game plan, while Cody always has his power, but he was just much too emotional and he got caught. This time around, I think if Cody fights like he did against Dominic Cruz, where it was just like a technical masterpiece, I think he should beat TJ. In my opinion, Cody's boxing is some of the best in the UFC, definitely better than TJ's. and I think he's got more power. And I think this time around, if he comes in with a better game plan and doesn't fight emotional, he's going to win. So my prediction is actually Cody Garbrandt by first or second round knockout. I think it's actually going to be all the pressure on TJ this time because he didn't even really want this rematch. And personally, I think that's because he knew that he could lose easily just because these guys go back and forth so much. So in my opinion, Cody Garbrandt's going to win this fight by knockout this time around.